Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wealth Preservation Podcast. I am here with my co-host as always, Josh Saunders. Josh, how's it going?
Great, Mark. How are you doing today, man?
Fantastic. Looking forward to today's episode.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be talking about some charitable giving and how that works. And we have awesome guest on today, Kris Putnam-Walkerly. Kris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
We are good. So you were on the last episode, and we kind of went into your origin story and how you got to where you're at today. Can you just take a couple minutes and kind of go back and kind of revisit that and bring us up to date and how Kris is where she's at today?
Yes, absolutely. So today I am a global philanthropy advisor and strategist and coach. And I started consulting in philanthropy about 20 plus years ago. Prior to that, I was working first at Stanford University, where I was evaluating youth and gang violence prevention programs. And it was funded entirely by one foundation. And so that got me really intrigued about the power of philanthropy to create a lot of change. In that case, it was trying to change and prevent youth violence across California. So I thought it'd be a great idea to go work for a foundation. And I did. It was the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, Dave Packard's of HP's family foundation. And I learned a lot, learned that I love philanthropy, began consulting on the side, first with Charles Schwab's family foundation and then others, and learned I loved consulting and philanthropy and thought, well, I'll just give it a whirl and see how this goes. And 22 years later, I'm still at it.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I mean, that is a very, very niche market.
Yes.
To say the least, right? I mean, Mark and I used to work in the asset protection world and, high net worth attorneys and consulting, and that market is really, really small. And you're like a subset of that market, which is really cool. I mean, that's very, very interesting.
Yeah. Which, and if you want to give people a closer view as to like the niche you work with, so who's the typical person you consult with, right? I mean, if someone were to walk in the door and you're like, hey, you're the perfect fit for who I consult, like what does that look like?
Yeah, there's a couple different kind of categories. One would be the CEOs of grant-making foundations. This could be the family foundation, a corporate foundation, a community foundation, or other kind of private foundation. And then also ultra-high net worth individuals and families who are seeking to be philanthropic. And a third really is family offices. So a lot of ultra-high net worth individuals, as you know, have family offices, and a lot of the giving happens through those organizations. So, but with all of them, really, what I'm trying to do is help them to gain greater clarity about what kind of, philanthropic impact they want to have, what kind of philanthropic family or company they want to become, how to engage the kids, how to engage the employees in giving, and, just thinking about, what do we want to accomplish with our giving? What's the best way to accomplish it? What are the issues that are meaningful to us as a family or as an organization or a company, and how can we create the greatest impact in that particular issue? Because there's usually lots of different ways, and so it's helping them figure out the way that makes the most sense for them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's people have been giving money away for a long period of time, and I'm sure you've seen some that's been super highly effective, and others that's been not effective at all, or maybe negatively impacted.
You're like doing anything good with it, right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, before we dive into that, you wrote a book. We would love to. You have a copy of that around, and we'd love to.
I think I see it right in the background as well.
Yeah,
so.
Perfectly placed. Yeah, you got that exactly.
So, delusional altruism. So, can you give us real quick, and then we'll dive into kind of the meat of this. But what can people expect from delusional altruism? And I guess can you give us a snapshot of how you developed that title?
Yeah. Great question. So Delusional Altruism is really it's a really practical guide book to help donors and funders of all sizes, all types to, give meaningfully and avoid kind of misguided beliefs and bad practices. The premise of the book is really that a lot of donors are getting in their own way. They're genuine in their altruism. They really want to make a difference, change the world, help their community, give back, whatever. Genuinely, but are getting in their own way. They're kind of clinging on to misguided beliefs and practices that actually aren't serving them. And so in the book, I try to help donors understand what those practices are and what they can do differently to be more transformational in their giving. And in my opinion, to have a more transformational impact on your neighborhood or an issue you care about, you have to transform yourself as a donor and how you give.
Yeah. You could maybe tell people like, hey, the whole A for effort thing does no impact to the receiver of your to who you're trying to benefit, right?
Yeah, and so by delusional, I don't mean crazy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean misguided. And so, kind of thinking you're doing the right thing, but you're actually making a lot of mistakes and you don't realize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's kind of I want to get into that part of it. Like, how does that delusion or misguided happen, right? So somebody, come to the big heart, or some would argue maybe some tax purposes, but a big heart says, hey, I want to do something great, right? Or I want to do something good for my community or this cause. And then how does that get messed up? Where's it go off the rails?
Yeah, it goes off the rails in so many ways. One of them is a scarcity mindset. So really, you would think that people of high wealth are very abundant in, the wealth they have and in their thinking, but there's a lot of scarcity in philanthropy and a lot of scarcity even among the, ultra wealthy. And it manifests itself in philanthropy most often by, it's sort of this belief that by maintaining a Spartan operation, you're somehow delivering greater value to the community. So often a classic example is a donor that only wants to support a nonprofit where, 99 cents of every dollar goes to help the people that the nonprofit's trying to help, and only 1 cent is for overhead, which is somehow deemed horrible and bad and evil. Right. And not recognizing that, if you have a nonprofit that you want to be successful or you believe in or is doing great work, well, they need to hire and retain top talent, especially today, right? They need to ensure that they have great financial management systems. They have a way to evaluate themselves, make improvements, to communicate, great fundraising, a good financial management system, a great board of directors, all these things. Well, all those things require investment. It's not at all unlike a business. A business owner understands that to grow, you have to invest in your growth. You need good financial management, great, CFO or bookkeeping. You need advising and coaching. You need to invest in your equipment and systems and technology and all these things, right, to grow. And so does the nonprofit. The nonprofit isn't like no money, right? It's about like impact. And so, I mean, obviously you don't want to fund an organization where the, executive director is making millions and millions of dollars, but I'm here to tell you, would you rather fund a nonprofit where the executive director, let's just make this a big kind of shocking example, makes $500,000 a year, but is able to successfully raise $50 million a year? Or do you want to say, well, that's ridiculous. You only can get paid $100,000. So we're going to hire a less successful and talented executive director who can only drum up $5 million a year. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. No, absolutely.
Mindset that you think you're somehow better by lowballing, by being really cheap with the salaries. But the point is the impact. The point is what you're trying to accomplish. Looking at the 400,000 as look at how much more money is going to our cause. It's look at how much money is not going to your cause, right? And the term there's no such thing as cheap talent, right? Applies across the board. I mean that applies to nonprofits as well. It really does, and it's a problem. I mean, there's a lot of before 2020 and the lockdown and COVID happened. About half. 40% or half of nonprofit employees in the U.S. were already burnt out, and there's a lot of exodus of nonprofit leaders right now and nonprofit staff. Recent estimates were something like 45% of all nonprofit staff are planning on leaving their job in the next few years because they're exhausted. We really rely on nonprofits to deliver services, healthcare, social services, foster care, whatever it is.
Right.
And when they get, very little support from their board, they're constantly fundraising because they're chasing dollars and they're trying to meet all these needs in the community. They're worn out and they're not getting paid sufficiently.
Right.
It's kind of it can be a thankless, it can be an amazing job, right? But it can be a very thankless job too.
Yeah. And I want to draw the analogy out of just like leadership, right? Because, we kind of talk to entrepreneurs here, but, as leaders of these organizations of high net worth families, and that trickles down right into those the layers of their nonprofit. that scarcity mindset, why is that there, and how do they not see that, right? Like how is, I know that's your big battle and what you're trying to go after, but why is that? Because passion only runs so far, right? You can only do so much with passion, and pretty soon you have to pay bills and live in a home. So why does that trickle down? What is that? Have you found a root cause of that, or multiple root causes, I should say?
Yeah, I think part of it is guilt, actually. So I think there's part of it, because that scarcity mindset applies to the donor as well.
Sure.
So I really believe that donors, foundation leaders, Fortune 500 corporate giving programs, whoever it is, also need to invest in themselves, in their own learning about the needs in the community, in hiring a coach or consultant to help them figure out, well, what kind of philanthropic family do we want to be? Like, what actually do we care about? And how do we involve our adult children in our family foundation? What does that actually mean? All that investment, it's investment in yourself. But the point is to have greater clarity and have greater impact and have more fun, quite frankly, while you're at it. Or investing in, learning about, meeting with other funders to learn how they're giving. There's a lot of learning involved in effective philanthropy. And I think a lot of donors, people of high wealth often have a lot of guilt. They have guilt because they didn't earn the money, they inherited it. So it's sort of not theirs and they feel bad about that. Or, they have more money than they've ever had in their lifetime. They never expected to have this much money after selling the business or whatever it might be. And they just kind of feel guilty. And so the guilt, it's kind of guilt and shame and feeling like I don't deserve this. And so I'm not going to, it's bad to invest in myself. I need to give the money away, which sounds noble, but I think it's delusional because I think to have the greatest impact, to be the best philanthropist you can be. And that initial investment in yourself can create a lot of long-term impact in the issues you're supporting. But I think, in terms of the, not being willing to support the kind of infrastructure and overhead and capacity of a nonprofit, I don't know. It's interesting. Sometimes I feel like all the smarts that an entrepreneur has in growing their business and making the wealth, like, get tossed out the window when it comes to giving. Really, I scratch my head a lot, and it's sort of like it's kind of this not serious, or it's kind of fun, or it's whatever. And there's just, I think part of the misguided behavior of funders is they just kind of glom onto assumptions that they've had, so it's just such a common assumption that, this is a good charity because they hardly have any overhead. And so you don't even think about it. You just sort of blindly assume that's the way you go without kind of critically evaluating what that really means.
Yeah. No, Mark and I have talked to lots of entrepreneurs, and, when you pay your employees well, take care of your employees well, they perform through the roof, right? I mean, we've talked to construction companies, and their whole goal is to make sure they pay their crews a living wage, and they're killing it. They're doing, they have people, even in this job market, they have people wanting to come work for them instead of them having to go out and find work, right? Or find workers, excuse me. So, but yeah, again, where's that breakdown at? Is that just, because you're like, oh, this is like a pet project and it doesn't need to be profitable, so we can kind of, but you really want to hire the best people to get the most impact. And it would seem like that would make the most sense, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's true. I just think there's a suspension of reason when it comes to nonprofit. Sort of like people don't recognize that it's not the same. I mean, it is a nonprofit business. It's a corporation.
Yeah.
The nonprofit part is about, like, there's no money involved. The nonprofit part is that when you have extra revenues coming in beyond your expenses, they go back into the into the community. They go back into the organization. There's no one like taking the money and running at the end of the day of the business. So
I mean, would a good analogous be like, if you were hiring somebody to go help you cure cancer, you wouldn't want to pay mediocre scientists to try and cure cancer. You want to hire the best, right? You want to be like, hey, who's the best?
Heart surgery? Do you want like the cheapest heart surgeon? No.
Right. Yeah.
Just heart surgery, right? The work that nonprofits are doing, I mean, it's like, trying to end domestic violence, supporting mental health, like helping people stop abusing drugs, healthcare. I mean, the nonprofit sector represents something like 12 to 13% of the workforce and, in the economy. So there's a lot of government cities and counties, contract their services to nonprofits. So it's a really important part of our society, and it needs to be invested in.
And I'm sure that, when it comes to being delusional, ego has nothing to do with that. That never seeps into, the philanthropists, having to admit that they've done things wrong or that their organization they're funding is, ineffective. That never takes place, right? I mean, it's just people want to get straight down to it and admit their faults.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, ego is an interesting beast because it manifests itself in a couple ways. One is kind of a hubris, like, well, I was a successful hedge fund manager and therefore I know how to end homelessness, or sort of. No, really.
Those are so similar. Really
yes.
And you see a lot of this in Silicon Valley, sort of these like genius, tech startup entrepreneurs who then want to apply their algorithm to, whatever social problem. And, while on one hand, like, that's cool. Like, obviously these problems are still around. So we need more innovative, new, fresh thinking and approaches to help solve them. On the other hand, you need to recognize that if they were so easy to solve, they would have been solved by now. So, you know what I mean? So I think it's really important, honestly. I mean, for any funder, wherever your starting point is, to really learn and understand, let's say you do identify, whatever the issue is, like mental health is a big one now with COVID, right? We don't, the mental health implications of COVID are going to be massive, and we have only beginning to understand, what that's going to look like 2 years, 5 years, 20 years down the road. So let's say that's an issue that you care about. Well, it's important. I mean, that's a big issue. You could talk about drug research, you could talk about access to care, you could talk about insurance parity so that, mental health services actually get paid for by healthcare insurance. But you know what? You want to learn, and you really want to learn from the people who are most impacted by these issues. You really want to talk to the nonprofit organization leaders that are running these services, or talk to people who have received or are suffering with mental health issues to learn, so that you can understand the complexity, understand the challenge, and create solutions that are actually going to help people.
Yeah, and I mean, we are going to probably really see this play out, I think, over a pretty long period of time, as far as the mental health aspect and COVID, because, you also look at how many, and now we're kind of getting off topic, but you look at how many workers have moved to remote only. And I think there's also going to be some, loneliness, isolation issues, and just things that kind of stem from, like, hey, we've kind of become more isolated and there's less human connectivity. I think that's, I'm not trying to solve the mental health issue here by any means, but I do think it is an interesting topic that we're kind of witnessing right now. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so Kris, can I get back to the book? What was kind of that impetus when you were like, okay, I've had enough of this, right? Like I work with these family offices and things like that, and they keep screwing it up, and so when was that like point when you're like, okay, I gotta at least get it out there, right? So you don't, they have less of an excuse, right?
Yeah, well, my alternative was beating my head against a wall, so I thought writing a book would be better.
Well, thank you for not doing that. We were talking about mental health earlier, so thank you for not doing that.
It really came from after, at that point, it was maybe 19 years of advising funders and really just recognizing that they were experiencing the same problems over and over again, and regardless of size. I mean, my clients include, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is one of the largest, some of the largest foundations in the U.S., down to, small family foundations, startup foundations, individual donors. And so the scale might be different. Even their level of experience might be different, but they were kind of encountering a lot of the same challenges. The scarcity mindset really applies to a lot of folks. And so just wanting to help, just recognizing my clients, and they're trying to do the right thing, but, you're trying to do the right thing, and then you spend a year and a half developing your strategy. And then by the time you develop your strategy, it's so outdated that you don't implement it. Like, I saw that over and over and over again. And, at this point, you can't even plan out much more than a year in advance. So you need to develop your strategy in a few weeks and begin implementing it right away. So just things like that I would see all the time. And so I decided to write the book to just, in a really in I hope, a non-shameful and kind of fun way to say, hey, like these are mistakes. Everyone makes them. I mean, I have made most of these mistakes. And, the book it's a really useful book for nonprofit leaders, even for business owners, because a lot of the ideas apply across the industries. But to really help people recognize, oh, I make some of these mistakes. I hadn't thought of it that way, but here are some very practical things I can do like tomorrow to change and to have a greater impact. So I wanted to write a book to, just help as many people as I could.
Yeah.
And also, I walk my talk in the sense of investing in myself. So I really believe that my clients, donors, foundation leaders need to invest in their own learning, growth, coaching. Well, I invest in my own coaching. And, I've had various mentors and coaches that I've hired, and I've been part of a kind of a global consultant network and community. And through that, met a lot of other consultants in other industries that had written books. And so, writing a book is not something, it seems like this like far-fetched idea. Like, oh, that sounds like a great idea someday, but how do you actually do that? Well, by investing in myself and my learning and this peer community, I met other consultants who had, and I could ask them, like, how do you do this? And I got help putting people together and, advice. And so that helped manifest the book, like in a very practical way.
Yeah. And because you said something.
We're going to come back to. Oh, go. Sorry, Mark.
Well, I was going to say, you said something interesting kind of there with people taking a long time to develop their strategy, and then by the time they go to implement it, it's outdated, it's ineffective. Can you give us an example of maybe a situation or a family foundation who's done that, and maybe we'll stop one of our listeners from pulling the same ineffective strategy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just, imagine if you're a business, today, and you don't really have clarity as to your direction and where you're headed. Would you want to figure that out 18 months from now, right? Or would you want to figure it out 18 days from now and begin implementing it right away, right? I think it would be the latter. But in philanthropy, it's, because honestly, there's not a whole lot of accountability. You know what I mean? I mean, there's some rules and tax regulations you have to follow, but otherwise, there's no quarterly, earnings reports, or, there's no other kinds of accountability. And so you have a lot of latitude. And I think too often funders take that latitude. And so they'll do things like, and again, it's often just kind of looking around and seeing how other funders are doing this. And if they're all doing the same bad practice, then that's what you do, kind of blindly, right? And so it's like it's like assuming it's going to take us a year to develop our strategy. I had a client that tried to do this once, and I looked at her schedule, and she had, I don't know, her and her board were going to meet like 16 times in the year to talk about this. And I just thought, like, who on earth wants to have 16 meetings?
Less meetings.
And it was just kind of like, we'll create a committee, and then we'll meet monthly, and then we'll add some other meetings, and and it was just this assumption of like, that's what you do. And I just thought, like, no, you get everyone together, you get clarity on like, what are we trying to accomplish? Maybe what's our 10-year vision, but what does the next year look like? What do we want to be doing a year from now? What kind of impact do we want to have? What kind of philanthropic family do we want to become? Where are we today? Like, literally. And what are the 3 things we should focus on to get us from where we are today to where we want to be? Who's accountable for each of those? And like, in 3 weeks, come back to us with a list of the things you're going to start working on, and like, start working on it tomorrow. I mean, to me, that's strategy, because it gets everyone in agreement upon where you're headed, and it gets people moving on those top priorities quickly. You have accountability, so you know whose feet you're holding to the fire, and you get things moving with the confidence that you can change course along the way, because obviously the world keeps changing. Conditions keep changing, and so what you think a year from now looks like today, obviously it could change, and that's okay. But just build time in that next year to kind of reflect, like, how are we making progress on our strategy? No. Okay, well, why? What's changed in our family or our company that might warrant us shifting our philanthropic strategy? What changes do we need to make? Do we need to add something, stop doing something? Let's make those changes. Now this is our new refreshed strategy, and keep moving. that way, everyone, if it's you and your spouse, or if it's your company, or if it's your family foundation, everyone knows kind of what's most important and what their own marching orders, like what they need to be focusing on to move forward.
Kris, I'm gonna have to disagree with you a little bit there. I think the best way to either beat cancer or homelessness is more committee meetings. I mean, I think that's the number one. Yeah, I think that's the number one way you do that. Is just have lots and lots of committee meetings.
Yes. Just have Bob at the end of the table.
That one a little bit.
Bob at the end of the table, like, have we thought about having a bake sale? Like, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob, at the end of the table.
Right. You know, I think one of the delusions that funders experience, I think, is fear, and how fear really holds donors and foundation leaders back. And I think the reason why donors, they often kind of wrap themselves up in what I call a data blanket. You know, they create these elongated processes, which often start with like, we're going to conduct a needs assessment, or we're going to do this environmental scan, or all this research, or have some town hall meetings, or whatever it is, right? And I really think it's because they are fearful that what they come up with at the end will be criticized. And so if they can demonstrate this lengthy, elongated, data-driven process that got them to their conclusion that they want to help end homelessness, that somehow they're safe. I mean, I really do this. One of my clients, she engaged me to do strategic planning, and she asked if we could start by doing a scan of how their foundation compares to other foundations in that state. And I just said no. This could have been it could have been like a $40,000, $50,000 consulting contract for me, because that's a lot of work, you know, to do.
Yeah.
But I just said no, like, that's ridiculous. I mean, you're a family foundation. You're going to compare yourself to corporate foundations and community foundations and other family foundations who have their own issues and dynamics. Like, there was no point to it. But it was she genuinely wanted to know, but it was really out of fear. It was kind of, I want to make sure we're not bad, or we're not doing this wrong, and you don't need to spend, that's just a waste of money.
Like, I'll save you some money based on your question. You're less effective. So there you go.
No, and they're doing great work, but it has to be in context of what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
You know, they had very specific goals, and they were working in certain neighborhoods, and like, that's great, but it's kind of comparing apples to zebras. You know what I mean?
Right. Which don't go together.
Maybe this isn't an aspect of it either, but just curious. Do you think, potentially, the small drip of dopamine that someone might get about meeting about doing good versus actually doing good plays into, that might explain the 16 meetings. Or if someone's like, hey, that data blanket, we all know people who love the data blanket of like, hey, I just need to do more research. Do you think that might play a role in it? And if it does, do you have like kind of a coaching method of like, hey, you're doing this, here's how we get you out of that mindset?
Yeah. I do a lot of coaching and advising of my clients, and, it's really just kind of helping them see what they're saying, like help them understand what they're actually saying. So one of my clients, again, it was around strategic planning, and they wanted to postpone strategic planning for about a year and a half. And it was all about forthcoming data that was going to help inform their strategy. So she literally said, this was like in July, well, we have, the county health needs assessment is going to be released in November. We want to have that data. And then next March, so 9 months later, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation was going to be releasing some data about, health outcomes in different zip codes or whatever it was. And then 4 months later, some other data set was coming. And I just said to her, well, there's no end to this. Like, there will always be more data. There will always be more research. You could do this forever and never have a strategy. You could just be waiting for data. It was right. Forever. And then also, the reality is data are always outdated. By the time the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation or anyone, does this, does their research, it's always based on a year ago or 2 years ago's data. And then they have to do the research, do the analysis, write it up. It's copy edited, proofread, peer reviewed, graphically designed, and then released. That's another, good 6 months. Mm-hmm. So even the data she's waiting for when she gets it in her hands will be outdated. And so it still won't be, I mean, it'll be helpful, but not that helpful. So,
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes it's just helping people, just kind of see things that they haven't thought about, which, I mean, I get that kind of advice from my business coach, who helps me
Right.
to see things. I'm not a criticism. It's just, people aren't born or usually trained in how to be philanthropic. And so you need help and advice.
Which does add kind of a nerve-wracking element to it, to where it's like, hey, you need to be as effective as possible, and then let those people running the data show you how good you did, right? Which can be kind of nerve-wracking, because it's like, all right, I guess I'm just going to be part of that data set, and hopefully I get good news, but I guess that's why they hire a consultant, right?
That's right. Yeah, but I think also I really advise my clients not to get too I don't want people to be overwhelmed in this work, right? So sometimes when you're just getting started, like, you really don't know what you're doing, or you don't really know how to approach it. And I really advise people, like, just get started. Like, you can get started by picking a few organizations that you know about in your community, or you pick a few issues that you care about, find some organizations to support, and give them money, and like follow them and see how it goes. Go to their events when you can, be at events, talk to their leaders and find out what the impact is, and see how you feel about the whole thing, right? See what you learn, what excites you, what doesn't excite you, and that can inform your giving. So you don't have to start with the whole strategic plan. You can start by giving, but just make sure that you're learning along the way and you're being intentional about it. Because, we all get appeals. Our friend is doing a bike-a-thon, or, something comes in the mail and is compelling. But really just be mindful and thoughtful about, what are the issues that I care about? What, how have I been helped in my lifetime, and how do I want to give back?
Yeah, I mean, doing something is better than doing nothing for a long period of time to try and do the best thing. It's the good versus great, or the great for good, analogy.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's not.
So Kris, fortunately, I don't think we have as many multi-billionaire family offices listening to our podcast, but I'm sure we have lots of people listening that either know people in the philanthropic organization. So how do they go present to these organizations to have maximum impact, to get either their item funded or to get funding for their organization? Like, what do people that present, what do they miss there, or should they really care about looking for a donor?
So you're talking about like nonprofit organizations. How do they get in front of donors? And
if someone's out raising money, I mean, what should they really look for in a good donor, and how do they present better to those? I'm sure you've sat on lots of those. I'll use the word pitch, but you sat on lots of those presentations.
Yeah, well, really, I think it starts with a relationship. So before there is any kind of presentation or proposal or any kind of pitching, I think you need to develop a relationship. So if you're a nonprofit leader, a couple things. One is, I think it's always helpful, not shocking, I always like a good plan. So it's helpful to have a fundraising plan. Like, how much are we trying to raise? Like,
right.
And what's the best way to raise that money for our organization? Because sometimes it could be getting a grant from a foundation. Other times it could be, trying to get a lot of donors, individual donors, and have an individual donor campaign, or planned giving, which means, you want to be in people's wills, which is kind of hard to plan for because they have to pass away in order for you to get funded. So it's building a relationship. It's doing your research with the, let's just say the foundation. So there's a lot of data available. You can go to their websites. They should have funding guidelines. What do they fund and not fund? And trying to, reach out to them, letting them know about the work that you're doing, and seeing if they'd be willing to talk to you or receive a proposal. So oftentimes there's like some relationship building on the front end, usually involves putting together some kind of proposal or application and submitting that. And then if the funder feels that you're a good fit for what they're trying to fund, then usually they'll invite you for a conversation or a meeting or something like that.
And how would you tell someone that's raising money or runs an organization, like, hey, I make a living wage, I pay my staff a living wage, and we don't use 99 cents out of every dollar to go fund this. We actually, our people need to eat, and they do better work when they actually have food in their bellies and a roof over their head. So how do you kind of help people work through that also?
Yeah, I think it's really just being honest. I think it's being honest with the donor and and like confident in yourself. Like if you're the nonprofit leader, like having confidence that you're doing the right thing and why you're doing it that way. I mean, at that point, you should know that you probably, because you're paying your staff well, you have better retention, because you're investing in evaluation, you have the ability to share the impact that you're having, and that sort of thing. Because you invested in board development, you have an excellent board of directors that's willing to back you up. So I just think it's really being honest and being willing to, in some cases, educate the donor about the reality of just like any business, we need to make sure we're, investing in ourselves, and this is what we do. But here's the result of that. As a result, we're delivering excellent services. As a result, we have great staff retention. As a result, our board of directors are these amazing people that are really involved in helping us. And so I think it's painting that picture for the donor to help them understand. And a lot of times, the donors want to hear that. They actually, I mean, there's such a power dynamic in philanthropy. The donor gives and the nonprofit recipient receives, right? And so there's clear who has the power. So it's very common for the nonprofit to try to paint a rosy picture of like everything's wonderful. Meanwhile, in the organization, things are falling apart, but they're afraid to share that with the donor because they don't want to kind of air their dirty laundry. But really the donor, a lot of them want to know, like they actually want to know what's not working well because they want to know how best they can help you.
Yeah.
I mean, one example is, a nonprofit theater company had, kind of cobbled together, I think it was like 4 different Excel databases for their, ticketing and donors and potential customers and whatever it was, right? It was a very inefficient system because it all needed to be organized together in a single database. And what they needed was funding to, for the database to like convert all these things and do the research, figure out the best database, CRM, whatever. They could have a much more efficient, organized system for selling tickets and reaching out to potential theater goers. They were too embarrassed to ask their donors. And they, didn't really have a strong enough relationship where they felt they could say, hey, this is the problem we're in right now, like, and this is what actually we need. Instead, they were asking for money for programs and arts education and all these things, which wasn't really solving the ultimate problem.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, and going back to that, part of you kind of lived that example, right? You were the one that was in San Francisco or the South Bay, walking miles to go print stuff every day, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And the simple thing was, why don't you guys just have a printer? You know what I mean? And but you were
yes.
Yeah, fax machine. That's right. Sorry about that. Yeah, fax machine. Yeah, and so it's almost like people take pride in being as frugal as possible.
Yes.
And kind of how do you help break that mold, right? Even for the donor and also for the donee or for the organization, and how do you make them have that conversation a little better? Or is that just part of being the delusion, right? Or trying to break that down?
Yeah. The story was, I worked for an organization that felt it couldn't afford a fax machine, so it forced its staff to walk a mile round trip to fax at some other organization, like borrow a fax machine from somebody else instead of investing in our own and just thinking about how much more money we could have raised had we instead spent that time, raising money. But I mean, when I talk to donors and funders and my clients, it's really just trying to help them see what it is they're actually saying.
Yeah.
Help them understand, if they don't invest in their own, like learning about an issue, then how could they possibly have the greatest impact on that issue, right? Or if they don't invest in, like a lot of families will have a family retreat, right? And try to kind of become philanthropic, figure out their philanthropic plan. But they won't hire a facilitator to help them facilitate. So what's going to happen is like, all the strange family dynamics are just going to like show up in that meeting, right? People don't get along and like, why bother? Because dad's going to make the decisions anyway, or like whatever it is. So
yeah,
it's like helping them see, like, do you want that? And like at the end of that meeting, like, how do you think you're all going to feel? Like, not very good. Or like, we can bring somebody in, can help you like create an agenda and facilitate this. So you guys can just sit back and relax and like participate and think and share ideas. And the facilitator will help you like manage dynamics and manage time and make sure no one's overtaking the conversation and help you get to the outcome that you need. Like would you rather invest $10,000 in that and then have a game plan that you guys can then execute? Or would you rather like waste a weekend like infighting and end up with nothing, and then like everyone's resentful?
You mean that affluent
like, which would you like?
You mean wealthy families still have family dynamics that just don't get along? I'm shocked. I thought that eventually went away.
I thought money solved all problems. I thought money solved all problems.
Exactly. Oh. No, it's amazing.
I mean,
so it's just helping people recognize, just kind of talking them through, or helping them see it from a different part of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow, your kid got into Princeton, and part of that is because you invested in private schools, and then you invested in tutoring, and then you hired a coach to help them, apply to college. Like, do you see how that investment like helped your kid be smart enough or prepared enough or do the right things to be able to get into Princeton? Like, yes, I see that. So, okay, let's use that analogy and talk about your philanthropy. Like that same kind of investment is necessary for the outcome that you're trying to create.
Yeah. Which, because I kind of not shift topics, but you had mentioned that a lot of nonprofit employees are looking at exiting the business. We've kind of gone through kind of a weird year last year. What struggles do you see in the philanthropic arena that you just think are going to need to be addressed or overcome? I mean, do we need to encourage nonprofits to be more in the public eye? I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think in philanthropy, there's kind of three things. One is, because the world keeps changing,
Mm-hmm.
like conditions keep changing, especially during COVID, it can feel very paralyzing, right? A lot of donors, foundation leaders can feel paralyzed because, the future feels so uncertain. I can't possibly plan ahead because things are going to keep changing. So why bother? And so they kind of withhold, kind of sit on the sidelines, waiting for, COVID to end,
Mm-hmm.
or waiting for fall, or waiting for, a president to be elected, like waiting for something. And so the problem with that is, in the meantime, like you're not giving, either not giving or not giving strategically.
Mm-hmm.
Or what I see a lot of my clients doing is they keep themselves very, very busy working on lots of stuff, like the stuff they can control, but not the important stuff, right? So it's like they're literally in a ton of meetings, or they're literally like trying to get to inbox zero, or they're literally just kind of like cleaning the office, or like, reviewing proposals or adding. I mean, I have one client who, because they had less money to give away due to COVID, it was a corporate funder, less money to give away, but greater need, because there's greater need. She busied herself by like adding more questions to the proposal process. So she was overwhelmed, exhausted, super busy, but she did it to herself because she came up with more questions that then she asked the nonprofits and made them go through more hoops to get more data to make a quote unquote better decision, because she was so scared she'd make the wrong decision with the little less money that she had. So, so I think people, they, and all of this, meanwhile, everyone's getting paid. Like if you're a staffed, foundation, people are still getting paid their same salary. So you're also now wasting money because you're either doing nothing or you're doing the wrong thing because you're overwhelmed because the future is so uncertain. And so what I really advise my clients and help them do is recognize that, the future is no more uncertain today than it was last decade or last century, right? And, disruption and volatility are the new status quo, and we just need to expect that. And so instead, to kind of shift your mindset around planning ahead and recognizing that, given the information you currently have, like create the best plan you can, begin implementing it right away, assume that things are going to change and you'll have to change your plan, and have the confidence that you can do that. But like get moving, get moving on something so that you have kind of your North Star, what you're trying to accomplish, and you're focusing on the 2 or 3 most important things that need to happen next for you to get there. And, I think entrepreneurs understand that because, you want to know what your business strategy is. And, if you're trying to grow or you're trying to move into new territories or areas, like, well, what are the 2 or 3 things we need to do to invest in ourselves to get there?
Yeah, Kris, do you think sometimes like some of these nonprofits try and do too much, right? They maybe spread themselves too thin or not focused. Is that a thing?
Or suffer from being busy
Yeah.
just to be busy?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of nonprofits suffer from what I call mission creep, which is, they have their clear mission of what they're trying to do, but then a funder comes along and says, "Hey, yeah, I understand that you are, trying to provide residential substance abuse treatment for youth, but we have funding for, access to healthcare. Do you also want to do that?" And they think, well, that isn't exactly, I mean, sure, that would be helpful. It isn't exactly what we do, but okay, we'll go after the money. And now they're doing it, have a whole program of care. And then another funder says, we're going to, yes, and we want you to expand to a new neighborhood. And they're like, okay, well, I wasn't really in the plan, but I guess we'll expand to a new neighborhood because there's money there.
Right.
And what happens is, like, none of it's bad, right? But it can really take a nonprofit off course. And chances are that money is very piecemeal. I mean, that's one of the challenges of nonprofit funding is it's like funding for this program and funding for that program only for a year, and then you have to reapply. And so you're kind of piecing together as a nonprofit leader funding from all these different sources to create like a whole, but there's never enough money for the whole, right? The whole organization, I mean. And so it's just really challenging, and it's stressful in the nonprofit. And so what's important for them is to have clarity on their mission, kind of what's in, what's out, and, really focus on how to communicate the value of that to donors.
So, Kris, it kind of sounds like people try and run philanthropic organizations differently than a normal business. Again, they're not exactly the same, when really they should be kind of running it more like a normal business and staying focused. Obviously, there's some caveats in there, but it seems like they kind of get off course because they want to run it differently because they think it should be different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of value to thinking about, how do you to running a nonprofit like a business. However, it's a really different bottom line, right? And
Sure,
so
absolutely.
obviously, like, let's just stick with that substance abuse example. There's a lot of recidivism. It isn't like you just offer a program, the person goes through it, and like, voila, they're cured and they're never going to use again, right?
Yeah, we get a check mark and a gold star.
Yeah, and then you're bad if somehow that person like relapses, right? And so you just have to recognize, and these changes take a lot of time.
Right.
And meanwhile, the problem could be getting worse. Like, meanwhile, the opioid crisis could be exacerbating in your communities, and you have the same amount of money. So but I do think, having, thinking about what's your strategy, what's clarity on your mission, vision, your values as an organization, your purpose, and then, what is the team, the talent, the structures, the processes that you need, and, really investing in your own systems to make that happen, and going out and getting the money for that. I mean, one nonprofit I know, like, did kind of like an A round of investor funding, trying to get like, before we start helping people, we need to build our capacity as an organization. And that's how they approach their donors. And that was the case they made. And it was very compelling because they were reaching out to entrepreneur investors who understood that you need to like get all your ducks in a row before you can deliver on the impact.
Yeah. Which and how because you had mentioned a few minutes ago about possibly going after families for, hey, you could include this in your will, you can include this in your estate planning. How could estate planners or tax planners or family offices, how do they bring this to how do you consult them to bring this to their clients of saying, hey, this isn't just giving money away to give it away for a tax benefit. This is something that can be part of your legacy ongoing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think wealth advisors, estate planning attorneys, can be part of the delusional problem. And by that, I mean, oftentimes a high net worth family will turn to their wealth advisor to say, hey, like, we want to be more philanthropic. We want to start a foundation. Can you help us? And one of the mistakes that I think wealth advisors and estate planning attorneys make is they say yes too quickly. So they just, because they're trying to serve their client, right? So they go, sure, whatever you need, we'll do it. Like, you want a foundation? Okay, I'll drop the paperwork. Let's get that going. What do you want to name it? Right?
Yeah. How much can I bill you? Yes.
Yeah.
But, and but instead of saying, well, hold on, before you create a nonprofit organization that you have to manage, which is what a private family foundation is, let's talk about what are you trying to accomplish with your philanthropy? Like, why do you want to be more philanthropic? Like, why do you think a family foundation? And really just having a conversation to really push back a little bit on their thinking and really unpack what it is they're trying to accomplish. Again, like what's the what, the why and the what of what they want to do before figuring out how best to do it. Because there's other giving vehicles. You could create a family foundation, or you could create what's called a donor advised fund, which is like a charitable checking account, which is very low labor. It's very easy to do and still give the money away to the causes you care about. Or there's other kinds of, giving vehicles. And so, and even like, how do you want, if you do decide you want to involve, create a foundation, like, what do you want to accomplish with that foundation? So to me, it's just being willing, honestly, to have those conversations. And a lot of wealth advisors, either aren't prepared or don't feel confident to have those conversations. So oftentimes I'm brought in those situations to help kind of partner with the estate planning attorney or wealth advisor to help the family have more like kind of mission driven conversations about what it is they're trying to accomplish and how do they want to involve the kids who are living in different states and, have.
Yeah, because there really are lots of moving pieces to that, right? It's not just like, oh, hey, we set up a foundation and boom, voila, now we're helping people. It's much bigger than that, right?
Yeah.
Which might be a challenge just to the wealth managers and the estate planning attorneys of like, hey, trying to figure this out on the fly is probably not going to serve your clients the best, right? If they say, hey, I want to be charitable, and you're like, sure, donor advised fund, right? I know a company that does those. We'll just set one of those up and boom, done. Check that box, right? I mean, getting educated yourself on, okay, yeah, I've read about this. I have the super awesome book, Delusional Altruism. And here's how we can go about this is probably, something that advisors should do first.
Yeah. And also recognizing that, having conversations with your clients about philanthropy is one of the best ways you can retain your clients across generations because I mean, we do have this massive generational wealth transfer that's, starting and will continue for the next 2 decades. And, data show that when kids inherit money, they, promptly, fire the parent's wealth advisor and go find their own. But they're not going to do that if they have already developed they're less likely to do that, I should say, if they've already developed a relationship with you, like they know you, they trust you, they have your phone number, they've been in meetings with you. And, and part of that could be because you've helped that family help with their philanthropic giving and you've been the one that's been there for them. And so, it's obviously a lot cheaper to retain your clients over generations than it is to go find new ones. And so it's really smart for wealth advisors, estate planning attorneys, and, others, tax planners to help to work with, advisors like me who specialize in philanthropic coaching and advising and who have exactly zero interest in like doing their job. I mean, I'm not going to take their client away, I'm not going to manage money. But I can partner with them to help them figure out, how do we work together to make sure that the family knows its philanthropic mission, and you're growing the wealth to make sure that they have that money in perpetuity or in the long term.
And also educating those kids as to why the philanthropy is involved, right? Because so many people look at it as like, well, you're just giving money away, and they don't see the bigger picture of like, a lot of times there is like a tax benefit, but then also something, baked into what what the parents wanted to leave behind, right? And so just saying like, oh, that's nice that dad had that heart for that mission. Anyway, you're fired, and I'm going to go do my own thing, right? I mean, really getting them on an educational level early on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much of wealth planning for a family that's really about communication. And how do you have like a family mission? When you think about across generations and how do you maintain wealth, it's a lot more than, growing the money and, paying less taxes. I think it's a lot about like clarifying what your family's mission is and and communicating that and engaging people in ways that make sense for you and the family. I mean, I was just with a family who has a family run business. I can't name the name of the company, but I was asked to present about philanthropy at their family meeting, but the point of the family meeting was to educate the family about the family business, like literally the strategic plan and like revenue projections. And now they want to create a family foundation and they want me to help them. And so was educating the family about philanthropy and what that means and what you could do. And there was a lot of time and energy devoted to helping that family understand, kind of what was happening with the money and the advisors that were being brought in to support them and building relationships with them, which is really smart. So I think, part of it is, and I see the opposite happening. I see donors who are in their 80s who refuse to talk to their adult children who are like in their 50s or 60s, right? About the family money, about like how much money we actually have, like what you're going to inherit, to care for that. And even like the donors assume that we're just going to drop the family foundation into the laps of these kids and they're going to figure it out with zero conversation leading up to it. Like, that's just mean, like and it's, I don't know the family dynamic, but that could be out of fear or not having good communication, but you're not setting up your family for success if you're not engaging them in a conversation about giving. And, it's different for every family.
So Kris, kind of as we're kind of wrapping up this episode, kind of summarize your book and kind of how do people make that maximum impact on what they're trying to do with their philanthropy, and then what are those pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, well, I mentioned a few of the pitfalls already. I mean, a few others are just kind of like creating too many steps. Kind of creating too many processes and steps along the way when you're giving. Another one is honestly feeling overwhelmed. Yeah, and I think even when we're not living in a global health catastrophe, funders feel overwhelmed. I mean, there's a lot of problems in the world to try to tackle, like picking which problem you care about. There's a lot of nonprofits to support. And just kind of being overwhelmed in like, how do you go about this? I don't know where to start.
Right.
And that holds people back. And of course, I think asking the wrong questions is another way. And I alluded to one of them before, but it's asking how we're going to do something before getting clarity on what we're trying to accomplish. So asking, do we want to, just write checks or form a donor advised fund or, create a foundation before having clarity on what are we trying to accomplish with our giving. You can't make the right choice because you're choosing among options before you know your objective. So that's a problem. And so, some of the ways to be more transformational are certainly to start with the right questions.
Right.
And I alluded to some, what do we want to accomplish? But also I think, donors should ask themselves, what do we already know about this problem or this issue? Because you might think you don't know anything, but you do know a lot. So you do know, if you've run an organization, like a lot about how to run a nonprofit and what a nonprofit needs. You do know if you have experienced certain kind of problems in your family, you do know about those needs. You do know, so you kind of spend some time with yourself or your family or your company to say, well, we're trying to, let's say you're a company and you're trying to improve education, getting more kids graduating high school and into college. Like, you can talk about, like, what do we already know about, like, the school system? What do we already know about our own experiences? What helped us get through high school and get through college? And so honestly, just kind of summarizing that, writing that up, and then figuring out, well, what don't we know? So we know all this stuff, but there's still some things we don't know. But if you do it in that order, then you're not kind of like blindly looking for information, right? You at least have a starting point of like what your kind of education strategy might be. And then you might go after bits of information like, well, we don't know what the superintendent is trying to accomplish. Let's meet with him and talk to him. So those are some things. I think also, trying to, what's really important, and I think it's been hopefully raised in everyone's attention and knowledge in the past year, has been racial inequity and, systemic racism and institutionalized racism in this country, and the challenges of that date back, since the beginning of the country was formed, and the implications of that over time. And so, I mean, just an example right now, people talk about climate change and heat. Well, communities that don't have a lot of trees are hotter Like if you live in a tree-lined community, the trees are providing shade, and it literally could be 10 or 20 degrees less hot in your community on a hot, sunny day than in a community that doesn't have those. And so a lot of those, like who lives where, goes back to redlining, which were racist housing policies. And so I really believe that a donor, if you genuinely want to have a positive impact, then you need to understand what's created those problems and try to address them in meaningful ways, if that is like systems change or like changing policies that allow for larger scale improvements, and really understanding, kind of disaggregating data by race or ethnicity or LGBT or disabilities or whatever it is, to understand, like, maybe everyone seems to be doing okay, but some people are doing really poorly, and some people are doing a lot better. So how do we create strategies that are equitable, that really raise everyone up, given where they're at, to succeed?
Yeah. Well, I think that was a great segue and a place to end it, Kris. Thank you so much. I'm sure Mark would agree with this, but what you do is so needed, and there's so much impact that needs to be made. And we see it all the time as basically money and assets and resources wasted because they're just not allocated correctly. And that's you can call that capitalism or whatever you want, but we do need to help people do that. And just because you're good at one thing, running a business, doesn't mean you're going to be great at giving it away. It creates this whole other set of problems, right? Family dynamics and all of that fall into place.
And good intentions get you so far, right? You can be very well intentioned, but it could be extremely ineffective, as you've seen and consulted people away. So it's extremely needed. Again, Josh and I have had someone on our podcast who helped with charitable structures and it is just such a needed thing where it's like, hey, if you want to do charity, there's a right way and wrong way, and if you don't know, don't let your ego stand in the way. Like let's get help and let's incorporate some of that charitable planning. So,
and Kris, before I forget, we'll connect you with Mccartney at some point. It'd be great for you guys to have a conversation. You guys are incredibly like-minded. You guys don't work in this. You work in the same space, but not on the same stuff. So it would be good people to know.
Yeah.
Great.
Perfect. Well, hey, Mark, let's kick us off into the speed round.
All right. All right. First speed round question. If you were to induct one person into the Philanthropist Hall of Fame, who is it going to be?
I think right now I would induct Mackenzie Scott.
Nice. Very good.
Ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, who gave away $8 billion within 12 months during COVID.
Not bad.
That's more than I gave away during COVID. That's more than I will ever make. So
and did so in a way that was very focused on racial equity, gender equity, and giving large grants, very, very little requirements to these organizations that were doing great work, so they could really make a difference.
That's awesome. So for our listeners, if they're getting ready, if they want to go and and give money and be philanthropic, what's the first thing they should do before just writing checks and giving blindly? What would you recommend for someone giving?
For somebody giving, I would ask myself, what do I want to accomplish with my philanthropy? Like, what kind of philanthropist do I want to become? And even if as a philanthropist that might be giving away $1,000 a year, what kind of impact do I want to have?
Perfect.
Good. That makes sense.
And then, okay, if you had 1 week, you've got no emails, no phone calls, no meetings, cut meetings out. I think we've touched on that a couple times, that meetings are, minimize those. Where do you go to unwind and find inspiration?
I'd say beach vacation. That would be my go-to.
Nice.
Undisclosed beach location.
Are you just
even better?
Lawn chair, umbrella, toes in the sand, and just like with a book and listen to the waves, or is that?
Yeah, yes, just relax. Like no agenda, nothing going on. A pool, someone delivering me cocktails and food.
Obviously.
So the Four Seasons at Kona. Got it. Four Seasons at Kona. That's
That would be lovely. I'd be happy.
There you go.
All right. So if you can bring back, you're throwing a benefit concert, right? And going to raise all this money for charity. One musician or group, dead or alive, who is performing that concert?
I'd have to say the Beatles.
There we go.
That's
boom.
Because they appeal to so many. I mean, I can't imagine raising more money than with an organization or a band.
Of course, you almost have to specify, like, okay, early 1960s Beatles or
Well, it'd be all of it, right?
Okay.
It would be, love the Beatles.
A walk through the 60s.
I love it. Perfect.
Awesome.
Well, if there's a way we can make that happen, I mean, Ringo's still around, others. So maybe we can still make that happen. You don't know. Partial.
Yes. And I think, is Paul McCartney still doing tours? Or did he do his last one?
I don't know. Yeah. They always do their last one, and then they do more.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the last one. That's true. I think the Rolling Stones have had 20 last tours.
Yeah, farewell tours.
The Rolling Stones did their final tour.
Yeah. Can it be like a sequel to a farewell? Can there be a sequel to a farewell tour? Like, hey, farewell times 2.
Re-farewelling.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Well, Kris, thank you so much for being on. We really love this conversation. And can you plug your book one more time and where people can get it? We'll have it in the show notes.
Sure. Well, shockingly, you can go to the website delusionalaltruism.com, and that will give you all the links to buy it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and whatnot. And that also links to my website, so you can find me there, Putnam Consulting Group, Kris Putnam-Walkerly. And, I'm happy to talk to any of your listeners who are seeking to be more philanthropic or wanting to start a foundation or just have questions about giving. All my contact information is there on my website.
Perfect. Can you hold up your book one more time so we can show it for our video viewers?
I can, yes.
Perfect. Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, again, for all of our listeners, like Kris said, if philanthropy is philanthropy is, geez. Jay, you're going to have to cut that one.
You're not alone.
If philanthropy is something that you're interested in or just want to, look into more, or even if you're, you run an organization, you want to figure out, kind of how to make your donors think better. I think that's kind of know the people you're working with. And I think that would be a great thing to do. And maybe you can make that organization, those donors, be more effective in their giving, and that might involve you. So definitely check that out. So Kris, thank you again so much for being on.
Yes. And another shout out to the advisors and estate planners and tax planners to start researching this and having this conversation with your clients as well. I mean, if you really want to, like Kris said, generational clients and make this something where maybe that's delusional altruism because now you're kind of doing it for self-benefit, but it is really being the biggest impact to your clients. So research it, see if it's something that your clients want to dabble in. As always, nothing we say can or should be taken as tax, legal, or financial advice. If something sounded super awesome and interesting, go talk to your legal, tax, or financial counsel. You can also go schedule a call with Kris.com. You can go, that is going to be in the show notes and in the podcast description. Go seek counsel before doing anything. So,
perfect.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Awesome.